Hello and good morning. My name is Hope. Welcome to Hopefully Here. Super stoked to have you. We're talking nonfiction November today. So nonfiction November is an initiative, and I don't really know where it started or when it started, to read nonfiction through the month of November. And it's totally subjective. Like, you can take whatever you want with it and do whatever you want with it. But I think the goal is you read at least one nonfiction book in the month of November. You do that, you have succeeded in the challenge. I started the year off strong with nonfiction, and then it has really petered out. So I am going to attempt to do one nonfiction book a week through November. I have 6 that are on my TBR, so I'll be able to pick and choose what I want. But before we get into that, I have 5 recommendations. Now, my previous video, recently I did a video just recommending some fun books to read, and there were some nonfiction books in that list that, if you are curious or would like some more prompts, the ones that I don't give you here, interest you, maybe check that out. But the 5 that I have here are ones that I really enjoyed and would definitely recommend. We're gonna start off super strong. One of my favorite memoirs I've ever read, Solito by Javier Zamora. This is about Javier as he migrates from El Salvador up to America. But he's 9 years old, and he does this with no family. He's with a group of people, but his parents are already in America, and the rest of his family has stayed in El Salvador. It's a harrowing journey, it's gripping, and it's heartbreaking, and what at 9 years old he had to endure is absolutely insane, but it's such a well-told book, and it is a memoir that has stuck with me, and I think is possibly the best memoir I've ever read, my favorite of all time. So I would definitely recommend Solito by Javier Zamora. Next up, and sticking with memoirs, we have one that's insanely popular, and if you haven't read it yet, you really should. It is Know My Name by Chanel Miller, and this is a book about sexual assault and victim oppression, and her having to navigate the waters, even though there is so much proof against her accused that you'd think it would be a slam dunk case, and it's just not, because the court system is so messed up. And it's her story as she navigates the waters of a harrowing, traumatic, terrible ordeal, and what that does to her and her family and all the different people involved. It's really, really good, and there's a reason it's incredibly popular and definitely worth your time. Next, we have Call Me Indian by Fred Saskamoose, and this is a story about a boy or a man who had to go through the residential schools in Canada and became the first treaty Indigenous player to play in the NHL. He only played for 12 games, and it's the story of the decision behind only playing the 12 games, but also his process to getting to the National Hockey League, and then following his exit from the National Hockey League, what he did with his life, and how he was able to build other kids up, but also help his community. It's obviously, the residential schools are horrifying, and what that did to shape the rest of his entire life is heartbreaking, but it's a really good book. It's maybe a little bit more niche because of the focus on hockey, but it is still very much a story worth anybody's time. Next up, we have How the Word Is Passed by Clint Smith, and Clint travels around looking at different landmarks and monuments, and it's really about the story of how slavery shaped the nation, shaped America, and how different places either acknowledge that past or try to hide that past. And it's a really fascinating look at how history is shaping the present, whether done correctly or properly, or intentionally it's being sugar-coated. It's a fascinating look just at how history is recorded, and he does a really good job at looking at the different ways that history is being ignored or is being acknowledged and worked through. It's really good. It's also one that I believe has definitely been quite popular, but totally worth a look at what it is to have this this history of slavery and how it did shape the nation, even if people try to ignore that it did. And then finally, we have The Escape Artist by Jonathan Friedland. I read this earlier in the year. I think it might have been one of the first books I read. It's so good, and it follows two men, Rudolph and Fred, and they are two of, I believe, only 4 people who ever escaped Auschwitz, and their entire goal was to get out and tell the world what was happening in these concentration camps, because up until that time, not a lot was known about what was going on. And then what happens when they are able to get the word going, and some of the walls and really surprising restrictions they come up against. It's infuriating, but also like what they had to do and endure, and then what they did with it after is incredible. And I think it's a book that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about, and I think it offers a really different look at that time in history when genocide was happening in Europe and Hitler was at the realm. It's just a really great, in-depth, well-researched look at these two men who helped get the word out about what was happening in concentration camps. And it's not a happy book by any means. There's no real light moments, but it is really important and very well written. And now let's move on to the books that I have on my TBR for this month. I don't know that I'm going to get to all of them. I might pick them up and then they're not what I want, they're not what I'm looking for, but they're the ones that are on my radar, and I either have currently out from the library or they are coming to me quickly. So when it comes to nonfiction, I will use audio for nonfiction. I don't like audio for fiction typically, but for nonfiction I'm generally okay with it. So while I have the physical copies coming to me for these right now, there are some that I could get in audio form, and I may through the month take that route instead, but we'll see how it goes. For now, physical books, and it's the books that I was able to just have available to me. And they are books that some of them are quite old, some of them are more recent publications, they're all over the place, but they are simply nonfiction books that I found interesting. I'm not following any prompts or challenges. It's really just about the nonfiction that I would enjoy reading, and that was my only criteria. So let's get into the TBR. First up, we have Behind the Beautiful Forever by Catherine Boo, and this follows a makeshift town in Mumbai, and it follows or talks about different people who are living in this town that I guess kind of it exists in a more prosperous area of Mumbai, I think, but obviously it is an extremely impoverished area and different people that are there and their lives. I haven't looked too far into the exact synopsis of the book, but it was on a list of ones of like 50 nonfiction books you need to read or something, and it sounded really interesting. So I'm picking this one up, and it is an older publication. I think it was 2012 or something like that it came out, which means it was very easy for me to get from the library. Next, we have Dog Flowers by Danielle Geller, and this is a more recent publication. 2021 was when it came out, and this is again a memoir. Apparently those are the thing to read for me. They seem to be the type of nonfiction that I gravitate towards quite easily. But this follows her as, I believe her mother has just passed away, and she's exploring her relationship, I think, with her mother, but also her connection to the Navajo reservation, and why she and her mother were so compelled to leave the reservation behind. And I think kind of the trauma that goes along with that, and being part of a colonized area and all that brings up. I don't know much more. That's gonna be kind of the common link through all these, is I don't know a whole lot, but it just sounded really interesting, particularly the part about her mother passes away because she is trying to get sober. So what that would do to the psyche of her daughter, I'm really curious to read about that and the connection to her reservation and her history and what that looks like. And that is why I've decided to pick that book up. Next, we have The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot, and this was published in 2010. This is a book that I've heard people talk about. It was on my TBR because somebody somewhere recommended it ages ago. I don't remember who it was, but it's basically about a woman whose cells have been used for medical advancement, and she never gave consent for that to happen. And I'm not sure what happens beyond that, but it sounds like it gets pretty gray and unethical. So we'll see where it goes, but it's one that has definitely been on my radar for quite a while, and I'll be excited to finally get to reading it. The next book is quite old. It's from 1985, and it's The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by Oliver Sacks. And it's about the question of nature and reality. And I think it's got medical trials in it. I don't know much beyond that, and it is quite an older book. So I'm looking forward to reading it. It's another one that I heard somebody else talk about and thought it was interesting. But again, I don't really know anything other than what is on the title. And it sounds quirky. It sounds different. I'm excited to read that one too. The next book I decided to pick up because one of the first quotes on it was, "All wars are fought twice, first on the battlefield and then in memory." And that hooked me, got me hook, line, and sinker. I was totally captivated by that opening sentence. And this is Nothing Ever Dies by Viet Thanh Nguyen, and it was published in 2016. And again, I think it's about a look at history, and I guess in America it's called the Vietnam War, but in Vietnam it's called the American War. And I think that it sounds really compelling. So it's one that grabbed me instantly and will be one that I imagine I pick up sooner rather than later on in the month. And finally, we're gonna end on a memoir. We have Two Trees Make a Forest by Jessica J. Lee. And this is about a family memoir as they go from China to Taiwan and then ultimately into Canada, and that journey and look at family. I don't remember who recommended this book, but it's somebody that I trusted. So at least I remember I'd never heard of it before, and it came up in a conversation that they were having, and it seemed really compelling. Like I said, memoirs are definitely the type of nonfiction that I gravitate towards because I find them to be fairly readable and physically readable, which is how I prefer to consume my literature. And so that has definitely been on my radar for a little bit. And again, I was able to get immediately from the library, which is a criteria in a lot of my reading, is library availability. So there you have it. 5 recommendations, 6 on my TBR. November starts next week, which is wild, and I'm pretty excited about it. Hopefully it's a success, and I hope that your nonfiction November is a success as well. Let me know the nonfiction book you most want to read and the one that you most highly recommend. I'd be super curious. I'm always looking for new nonfiction books to put on my TBR. Thank you very much for joining me, and I hope your day is epic. Bye.